Welcome to this episode of the Essential Church Podcast, an ongoing conversation about some of the most important issues facing the local church. I'm your host, Andrew Arndt, and today I want to take you to a conversation I had not long ago with my friend Sam Jolman, who released a book called The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. Sam is a licensed therapist and has been doing a lot of work with men for a lot of years. And one of the things that he talks about in the book and that we talk about at length in the interview is that if we're going to reclaim masculine sexuality and health in our sexuality, we're going to have to go way beyond just the evangelical purity culture, which was more prohibitive than it was life-giving to us. And so Sam explores what it means for us, not just men, but also as women, for us to claim our sexuality as the gift from God that it really is. It was a wide-ranging and wonderful interview with Sam, and you'll feel the generosity of his spirit and his love for people come through in the interview. So without further commentary from me, here's to the conversation. Well, I'm really happy today to welcome my friend Sam Jolman to the podcast. Sam is a licensed therapist, been doing his work for over 20 years, and does a lot of work specifically with men in the area of addiction. And as of this week, is releasing a book called The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. And as we know, there's an epidemic of issues in our culture right now with men struggling with their sexuality, so many different battlefronts there, and Sam has courageously waded into those waters, not to just sort of wave the finger at us, but to kind of give us this like full-bodied view of masculine sexuality, where it goes wrong, and also by the power of the Spirit, where it goes right. So, Sam Jolman, welcome to the Essential Church Podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's such a gift to be here.
Man, we're glad to have you. So, there's a few different kind of areas of the book that I wanted to explore with you, and I do love that we're releasing this the week that we're releasing it, kind of a special release for us. I wanted to just ask you, we ask this question of a lot of our guests that write books, that have written books that have been on our show, but books, you don't just kind of like wake up one morning and you're like, I think I'll write about masculine sexuality. Normally, a book kind of lives with you for a long time. There's like a biography, a story that it has. So I wonder if you wouldn't just provide some context for us, Sam, and talk a little bit about the biography of this book. Where did it come from for you? Tell us that story.
Yeah, well, it started with my own story, which is not enough in itself to write a book from unless you're writing a memoir, I suppose. But even then, right, this idea of what's universal to all of us, what is human or resonant more corporately is the question. But it started with my own journey coming of age. And as is true of all of us, right, one day you wake up and sexuality is this thing that is the secret information is given to you in some way. You come to know that there's this thing called sex, but you also awaken to sexuality in your own body. So I think, coming of age, and I did not get a sex talk. I was handed a book and, said, if you have any questions, ask your brother.
Wow.
'Cause he knows, this was from my mom, who understandably, said, I'm not a guy. So, maybe you can talk to your brother about this. And I know now that my parents had their own story, right, of their own sexual neglect. So I'm not saying, not wanting to throw my mother under the bus there, but just to say, I came of age in this kind of wake of not getting much conversation around my sexuality. And then at 19, discovering pornography and thankfully getting caught as well by my mother and feeling this terror. I remember the day that it happened, and, I admitted it was me when she discovered the internet history, and internet was new, believe it or not, to our home. And I walked to my room and sat on my bed and thought, as my heart is racing, what happens next now that I've been caught, and I've admitted. And there was this both incredible relief that this dark world that was both alluring but terrifying, that I'd been, the secret was out. But my mother came down to my room and said to me, do you think you want to go see a counselor? Like, would that be helpful? And I said yes. And that ended up being a huge rescue in terms of the invitation to get some help. And I sat with this counselor thinking, well, great, now there's this relief, but this sense of, probably we're going to have a very, condemning conversation. I assumed he was going to lecture me about how bad it was, what I was doing. And, and that, it really was a sin issue, right? That I couldn't get under control. And thankfully, he was a really kind man. And within that first session, just was curious about me.
Wow.
And my story. And I kept waiting for the moment where he would turn mean, right? And really let me have it. And he didn't. And by the end, I was in tears, and there was this sense of whoa, discovering that so much more was showing up in my sexuality than just sin, right? It wasn't just, I'm stuck in lust, but there was, we talked about the growing depression I was wrestling with at the time.
Wow.
And my story, my wounds. So that set this course of, understanding that sexuality was this deeper conversation than I knew it to be.
Yep.
But again, is that enough to write a book from? No. So then, from the magic of that moment, though, with this therapist, it led me to saying with God, I wonder if I could offer this one day to people, and sit with people like this man had sat with me. And now, 20 years later, here I am, and I get to do this daily and sit with men. And, that's the other place where this was really formed out of, is seeing this consistent thread that men really hold their sexuality and with a profound silence, almost muteness, right? They don't even know really how to talk about it,
right?
And shame.
Yep.
And it's not even necessarily because of overt sexual acting out per se. That's can add to that, but there's this sense of just recognizing. This is, as I say in the book, this is a place. It's probably, though we're overly sexualized, right? Everything is sold with this certain sex appeal to men. We're so under sexually nurtured and developed. It's the place we've had the least meaningful conversations. In our life, even more than, male spirituality is itself a place of neglect. Right? But I would say, though this sounds wild, right? Because everything is geared towards sexually arousing men, but it's such a place of sexual neglect in terms of any kind of healthy formation.
Yeah, it's like we so don't know what to do with it that we cannot help but talk about it in ways that are exaggerated, off kilter, or destructive. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And it,
it's like this huge absence of love and wisdom around this thing that is like most core to us. I think that's what strikes me, Sam, in listening to your story. On the one hand, it's all too common. I think probably most men would say their story went something like that. Nobody ever really told me anything, or they told me vanishingly little. Then I got in trouble. And then it can go a number of places from there. Either there's a redemptive moment like you had, which was so beautiful. You actually, in this counselor, had somebody step in and do the fathering that you did not get around this. More commonly, it becomes an area of private anguish, pain, and addiction. And the tragedy of it is that I think a lot of parents proceed on the assumption that their kids, their teenagers especially, don't really want to hear from them about this.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, that might be true, because any of us that have waded into those conversations with our kids, there's kind of like that moment of like awkwardness. But actually, because it's so central to us, we're desperate for it. We crave it. You experience that with your counselor. And one of the places in your book, in the introduction, that I found just so fascinating was that you said that sexuality is one of the most unfathered places in our lives. And then you said there are maybe indications that this is shifting. A study from 2014 revealed that about 82% of parents had given their children some kind of sex talk, which is sort of a surprisingly high number.
Right.
Yet a Harvard study released in 2017 stated that 70% of so I hope everybody's listening to that. 70%, 70, of young adults age 18 to 25 wanted more conversations with their parents about sex and romance. So even though 82% had some kind of conversation, nearly 3/4 wanted more conversation than they got. Like, don't just give me the talk about the birds and the bees. Be with me every single day in this if you can. Or, you got to find a way to like come alongside me and help me with this. I wanted more. That's a huge discrepancy, you write. It shows that what parents are doing is not enough. We need more. And then you say this. You say that our sexuality needs to be cared for, nurtured, and blessed. The absence of care in this area is worse than neglect. Something like a curse lands on our hearts.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, if you think about it, if there's anything, that you hold as, hey, we don't talk about this.
Yeah.
It casts this pall of shame.
Yeah.
Over something that God has called good.
Yes.
And it's the artwork of God.
Yes.
And
gave for our pleasure and for the enrichment of our humanity. It's so intrinsic to who we are. Like, it's interesting even to think about Genesis. The scripture says, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them both. And so, like, from the very beginning, humanity is understood through the lens or through the aspect of sexuality.
Right.
And to pivot off of it, to ignore it, to pretend that isn't so, denies not just a part of who we are, but it denies who we are. We are known as, you know what I mean? Like, the man and the woman are known as male and female before they're known as Adam and Eve. Surely that's saying something to us.
Right. That this was called very good. And obviously, we fall from that moment. Mm-hmm. But, for us to understand that the original image is naked without shame.
Yeah.
That really captures, even our picture of vulnerability, right? Like, there's a reason we call it, I felt so naked, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's a vulnerability that we were meant to be able to live without shame.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about, I think one of the things that you do so well in this book is you kind of hit some of the areas of our awkwardness and our reluctance. But maybe we're awkward about it because it's just so much for us and we don't know what to do. So that leads to the next question that I want to ask you, which is, you and I, we're the same age. You and I came of age during the purity culture craze in the evangelical church. And so same kind of thing, like there was like this surveying of the landscape and seeing that there were these really destructive trends in teenage sexuality particularly. And so the wisdom was you have to have the talk, with your kids. You need to make sure they understand how it all works, so kind of the mechanics of it. But then also you really need to emphasize the value of saving yourself for marriage. And none of the listeners of our podcast would disagree with that, and I don't disagree with that. The value of just saying, like, there's a line over here that you really shouldn't cross. But what I hear you arguing in this book is that just saying here's a line that you shouldn't cross is not even close to being enough. So just riff for a couple minutes on purity culture and the ways in which not only hasn't said enough to us, but maybe in some ways it's also conveyed the wrong things about our sexuality.
Yeah, whether obviously implied or at least absorbed is maybe the better way to say it, is this idea that like purity culture made purity the goal of sexuality, kind of. And I know that sounds strange to think of it that way, but like that was the whole like North Star, right? Is that purity. And it really cast this vision of really the only way to think about your sexuality as like sin or not sin. And that you relate with, I think particularly for men, there's this fear of, I need to be afraid of everything that moves in me. I need to be afraid of everything sexual because I'm probably on the brink of lusting or acting out in some way. And I need to, and again, we're called to purity. So it's not that purity in and of itself is a bad thing, as a virtue or an ethic for your sexuality. It's just, it can't be the only goal. And as I say in the book, I really think that the goal of your sexuality is awe. It's you were made to be moved, and purity serves that, right? To have this capacity within you to really be moved, requires a purity of heart, right? An innocence of heart.
Yeah.
But the goal being awe, because I think otherwise, and this was true for me, this kind of implicit fear of anything that moved in me.
Right.
As, oh my gosh, that's lust. And so
Right.
it equates arousal with lust.
Right.
Which is not true. That as soon as I see a beautiful person or a beautiful woman, oh my goodness, whatever's happening in me is lust. And it doesn't let there be any kind of discerning of and blessing of our capacity to be moved by other people, by beauty,
and how that doesn't need to be deviant,
right? To
be appropriately sexual or sensual or whatever. And I'll just mention in this, one of the quotes you quoted an old saint, Saint John Climacus, in one of your chapters. It might have been the chapter on I can't remember which one. But he said something to the effect of, anybody that's able to appreciate the beauty of the human body. Yes. I'm butchering the quote a little bit, but our listeners will get it, and maybe you can fill it in. It's something like, anybody who comes to appreciate the beauty of the human body and really appreciate it in like a godly way has risen before the general resurrection and is full of the love of God in their soul. Or it's something like that.
Right.
And my spirit lit up when I read that quote, because it, like most men, I had my own struggles with, struggled with pornography when I was young. And then even when I turned the corner on that, after, kind of getting over that, I still like the idea, like struggling with lust. I just didn't know how to like work that out in my head. You know what I mean? Like what's the difference between noticing an attractive woman and tipping headlong into lust? Nobody'd ever really told me the difference between that. And I remember, I think it was reading something in Richard Foster when I was 21 or 22. He talked about the value of just noticing and appreciating the beauty of the human body, and that you could do that without tipping headlong into lust.
Oh, that's so cool.
And that like unlocked it for me. Yeah. And all of a sudden I could notice an attractive woman, and I could even say to myself, that's a gorgeous lady. And then I could praise the one who makes things beautiful.
Yeah.
And it just infused it with a sense of holiness.
Yeah.
No longer was that some kind of forbidden fruit that I had to be all weird about, but I could go, well, thank God. That's a beautiful human being. It's a beautiful sunrise, beautiful mountain, beautiful landscape, beautiful humans. And it changed it for me. And what it did also was that it shut down the possibility of shame around all that.
Yeah.
And I want you just to say something about, because a great deal of your book is about this, but how is it that shame, would you just describe how shame is connected to the falling apart of our sexuality?
Yeah, first of all, I just love that Richard Foster played
a
fathering role and offered you,
he did,
a 1-minute sex talk, so to speak, right? Like in that little sentence or two.
It's funny because that's actually continued even into our, I'm going on 24 years of marriage this August. And that's the thing that Mandy and I share. Like if we're watching a movie and some attractive actor, strides across the screen, she'll be like, "That is one good-looking man," and I'll be like, "You are not kidding." Right? And it's just, but there's nothing like weird about it. It's just like it's an appreciation of, and that actually cuts off a core tactic of the enemy.
Right. That's right. Yes. And I'll add one more thing and then jump to shame if I may. But, it even what I've discovered too is in allowing myself to feel moved and, as you said, to worship God and thank God for beauty and as a witness to his goodness, right? Mm-hmm. In the world, you start to recognize that beauty is a way bigger category than like hot people.
Right.
We have such this emaciated view of human beauty that gets, shoehorned through, our pornified society or beauty standards. And you start to realize that beauty takes on a profoundly fuller sense when you allow this, because you start to see the beauty of, I had a friend that was telling me, watching the NCAA, the women's NCAA, and watching Caitlin Clark, the Iowa, basketball star, and just the finesse. And he was describing like it's not lust. He was working this out himself, and he was saying it's not lust, but it's something I'm moved. And I was like, dude, that's awe. Mm-hmm. You're seeing the beauty of her athleticism and the fullness of her.
Totally. And what the enemy would like to do is the enemy would like to make you misinterpret awe as lust.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden I feel shame around the lust, and I have a decision to make about that. That might actually drag me down to a really dark place. But it also closes off a possibility of me really knowing how to experience awe, because I've misinterpreted it. So now I can't even and that's so, you just cite some studies. Human beings who engage in acts of appreciation of awe are actually statistically better human beings. You know what I mean? Like we're warmer, we're more generous. Like all of the deliverables about being a decent human being go up when you know how to appreciate. And so, of course, the enemy would want to attack us right there.
Right. And awe is also this wild pleasure, and that it's non-hedonic. Right. So it doesn't, which is a term to describe the more you do it, actually the more pleasure you get in it, not less.
Right. It doesn't, it's not like diminishing returns on like, oh man, another sunset. That doesn't happen.
Right. You actually get more pleasure the more you awe at things.
Yeah.
And yes, what you're saying, evil hates our sexuality. Mm-hmm. Right there. I mean, if, and as I say in the book, like we're used to chapter and verse divisions in our text. But if you look at Genesis 2 to Genesis 3, right, that transition, Genesis 2 closes out with, it's almost this like curtain closing, right? Mm-hmm. Adam, something like Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame.
Right. Now
the serpent was more crafty.
Right.
Than any of the wild animals.
Right.
And it's literally the next phrase. So you just think of how quickly evil came to assault naked, unashamed awe. And I think that's true of all of our stories, that evil hates you being moved, right? Moved sexually with good sexual pleasure and good sexual goodness, but also just you moved, as I say in the book, as a lover, your lover heart, all that you were made to take in the sensual pleasure of the world, that sexuality is a symbol of. And, what is the magical thing that evil does to shut this down on us? What's this magical spell it can do is shame, right? That's the fruit of Adam and Eve's sin. And shame is really this experience of exposure. There's research done on shame that says it actually promotes a fight or flight response inside of us, as if you're, in the presence of a bear,
right,
or some danger.
Right.
Except in this case, you're the danger.
Right.
And so how do you run from yourself? Right? You can't
Right.
run from yourself, but you can through splitting.
Mm.
So most of us will try to shut something down in us. We don't live in shame very long because shame is terrifying.
Right. We have to soothe it in some way. And
Right.
how often are our methods of soothing our shame just a perpetuation of our sexual brokenness?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, say something about that as a counselor. I mean, you're working with guys who are stuck in these
Yes.
shame cycles, and their solution for their shame is the very thing that's causing them shame. Say something about that.
Yes. Yeah. So, how do we run from ourselves? We split, right? We push a part of us, usually our sexuality, in this case, into the shadows, right? We push it in silence or secrets or shut it down, or man, I'm broken or bad or or dirty or perverted. But that actually just doubles your relationship with shame because to hide is to push something. You can't live very long from all that you are. You can't push your sexuality away and expect it to just go away.
Right.
It's going to rear its head. But now that you've joined the voice of shame, it's going to show up in shameful places. And this is known in counseling terms as traumatic reenactment.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that we tend to feel pull to reenact parts of our story. It's a part of us that, it's how we predict the future from the past. Is that we'll tend to relive or act out parts of our story until we face them. As Richard Rohr said, what we don't transform, we'll transmit.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I was thinking about how, part of what you're advocating for in this book is that we as fathers do a better job fathering our young men, if we have young men in our lives, in the area of their sexuality. But it's very difficult to do that if we have not been transformed. Right. And so if we have pain that we're still dealing with and shame that we're still dealing with, you almost don't father your kid into that. You know what I mean? You do the work that you need to do. And so we want people to buy the book, obviously, so you don't have to give the whole thing away here. Yeah. But for the man that's caught in a cycle of sexual shame, guilt, brokenness, what do you find yourself saying to men by way of discovering wholeness? Like, what's the path out?
Yeah. Well, what I always hold in my heart is Jesus' way with the sexually oppressed and broken. There's a sense that, this is my opinion, but I feel like Jesus had some of his most intimate, personal, one-on-one conversations with the sexually oppressed and the sexually broken. And I think he wants to have that same slow, personal, patient conversation with you. And he held some of his greatest kindness for those people. He really worked first and foremost to dispel their condemnation and their shame, and then address the rest of their story. So, and which involved their sin. Go and sin no more came after, neither do I condemn you.
Yep.
So I think most guys have given up on the possibility that they deserve kindness, that innocence can be restored, that they need to be condemned for the story of their struggle and their sexuality. And I just want to invite men and really rouse men to a kind of anger against the shame that says, sorry, you're just fundamentally broken or a monster. When Jesus says, the gift we get in the gospel is an innocent heart, a childlike heart.
Yeah.
So where I start with men is there to where where they've come to trust the voice of shame as a true voice. I by the time men are talking about their sexual struggle, they've already prayed and battled and wrestled in the agony of all that. So it's not really a spiritual, like, I don't find it's a lack of spiritual hunger in a man.
Mm-hmm.
It's often just they don't know how to turn the table on the shame.
Yeah.
So that they can understand a little clearer, what do I need to repent of?
Right.
And often you need to start by repenting of your joining the voice of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start with, how did you get there? How did the voice of shame become trustworthy to you?
Yeah.
Where in your story did that feel believable?
Mm-hmm.
That this was true of you?
So much of this comes down to, I mean, you, again, taking it back to the top, if this is one of the most unfathered areas of our lives, then the neglect feels like a curse. And so a lot of the reason that people are running out, making a mess of their sexuality, is that they were looking for blessing and they were looking for safety that they didn't get when they were young. And the promise of the gospel is that we're already blessed and we're already loved just as we are. And there's something about that, I think, that just settles us, Yes. And it gives us the kind of secure platform by which we can follow the next thing that Jesus says, for instance, to the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more. Like, once we realize we're accepted and we're loved. And so much of that also, I think, is just conveyed through the faces of loving people that in a way stand for us as surrogate fathers and surrogate mothers. They look us in the eye in the middle of our shame and they say, you are loved, you're blessed, you're called, and we're going to walk with you in finding wholeness. And unfortunately, far too many men are trying to do this on their own. They keep, which forces them to bury it further and further underground. I mean, it's a Pandora's box of evil. There's something beautiful about just coming out into the light, finding somebody that you can admit it to, and not necessarily one of your bros, although it's good to admit to your bros, but admit to a bro and then go find a counselor, like the kind of counselor that you found, when you were a teenager, that could be curious with you and ask you good questions and then help you chart a path forward. And as a pastor, I find myself saying that over and over to guys, like, this is, unfortunately, a lot of guys struggle with this, and but come out into the light. You're not alone, and you're going to get through this. So I wonder, Sam, if you could just some final words. We have lots of different folks that listen to this podcast. A good chunk of them are pastors and leaders. What do you want to say to us pastors and leaders? How can we help in the effort to lead the men in our churches and the young men in our churches into sexual wholeness?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Andrew, everything you're saying is so well said. The ache for blessing that shows up in even people's, use of pornography, right? They're looking for a place of acceptance. And, it made me think of a man that I walked with, who one time told me, and this was in him confessing he had looked at pornography, and we were talking about just being curious about what led him there. And he said, I think I was looking for a woman with a really genuine smile.
Yeah, I remember that story.
And, you think about blessing, right? The craving he had that was showing up in his pornography use, which was a woman with a genuine smile. He wanted to feel the pleasure, and there's all kinds of things in his story that led him to craving for that.
But he was looking for blessing.
He was looking for blessing. So, I think, as I think about pastors, ministry leaders, to make the conversation bigger than just lust, not lust, sin, not sin, to understand that, I think the CDC said 1 in 2 women will experience sexual harm in their lifetimes.
Wow.
1 in 3 men.
Wow.
Which is staggering to me. Will experience some sort of sexual harm in their lifetime. So that's a staggering amount of people that that need to know there's a space and a place that's safe, that there will be a conversation about their sexual harm, not just, the one hammer of sexual sin. So it's some kindness for and some honoring of people bring a story to their sin. It's never just a behavior problem. And can you be curious with them about their story? Can you invite them to the kindness of Jesus' curiosity with them?
And maybe one of the things that we can do as pastors is to create environments where it is understood that your story is safe here.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And we should be saying that all the time anyway. Like this is a place where sinners come and receive the mercy. Right. And there are no better sinners or worse sinners. It's just a group of sinners standing under the mercy, trying to let the light flood in. But to say that over and over again until people really believe it, it feels like that's so much of the task of pastoral ministry.
Right. And to even say this is where the wounded come.
Yeah.
Right. And that those wounds can be a part of the conversation too, that Jesus wants to have with you. And that he cares about how you've been harmed, not just how you harm.
Thank God for that. Thank God for Jesus, as they say. Hey, the author is Sam Jolman. The book is The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality, available wherever books are sold. Sam Jolman, we love you and we bless you. We thank you for the gift of this book and giving it to all of us.
Andrew, much love to you too, and this has been a great conversation.
Grace and peace.